All right. Tonight, I want to talk about the deliberate mess making that went on in my situation. Now, my kids and I, we lived all together and alone several times, and we knew how things were without the extra people around. Um, and we would, of course, know what it was like for things to be clean because, of course, I would have kept things at a certain level of cleanliness. And we just us alone was a pretty peaceful little unit. Um, I knew, like they knew what I expected of them. I knew what kind of messes they would make, and it was nothing close to what the mess makers would do. My kids and I actually knew each other really well, and I knew my kids really well. And my family, whenever I lived with them in Texas, they began to do this thing where where they would wait until I was gone, and then they would go into the room my kids were in, and I think that they had collected trash for from times prior or something like that. But they would basically trash the entire room. They would literally take trash and tear it up, even sometimes into little bits, and like put it all over the room and have all these dishes everywhere. They would literally it was like they would go into a room that was clean, and they would somehow be able to make it look like that room just hadn't been cleaned in like a whole week or two. Now, I did have a brother named Sean, and Sean was a little bit on the disabled side. Um, and he would make a lot of messes. And whenever I began to realize that Sean had been sent in to sabotage my motherhood and to make me look some type of way, that was whenever I had to ask Sean to please be on his way. Now, I have said some somewhat negative things about Sean in other videos, but I will say that I am going to be making a video about the ways that Sean was abused that people don't know of. And I think that in a way, this behavior of people trying to make me look dirtier or lazier or scummier than I really was, it began pretty early on. There was a time that I lived in Cambridge Heights, and that I remember cleaning the house really well one day. And then JW, while I was in bed, I guess, or while I was at work, he trashed like the entire house. Like he went into my kid's room and like got stuff from one side of the room to the other. Um, like from wall to wall, which is something that kids don't really do. Like, not clean kids in clean houses. They don't do things like that. They don't just deliberately make weird demonic messes like that. And so this weird mess making thing, it was a weird thing. There was another time, um, and this was around 2020. There was another time that things were set up to look like my baby had gotten paint all over the room, all over my daughter's room. And like whoever did it, they really did get paint like all over my daughter's room. And my daughter's room was put together like kind of special. Like she, you know, was allowed to pick everything out in there kind of specially. And it was all really nice stuff. And then someone was, I guess, sent in to get paint and nastiness all over her, pretty rug and all over her things. And that was something else that I noticed whenever it came to Brett, especially, was that um, he would pay for something or bring something in, and then something would happen with that thing that he bought or that his money bought or whatever. And it happened way too often to just be a coincidence. Like, He bought the kid Nikes and some other stuff. Well, all of a sudden that's stolen. Or he bought the kid a cool rug and then all of a sudden somebody got paint all over it. Or, he helps me with, some jackets and some sweatpants and stuff. But then I have to lose an entire, article of clothing and the long johns that I just got because I allowed those things to be purchased or whatever. It's like it's like a way of saying like I didn't really mean for you to gain from that thing that I gave you. You know what I mean? I mean for you to stay at this even level of down. When the paint thing happened all over the room, like even my daughter was like, he didn't do this, mom. And she was referring to our 2 and 3 year old that she and I were raising by ourselves, basically. Um, she was like, he didn't do this. There's no way. And I knew that she was right. I knew that he couldn't have done that. He wouldn't have done that. Like, my kids were really, really good. And they weren't like just ignored and left alone. Just, you know what I mean? Because a lot of these kids are just ignored and left alone for so long that they even get upset about how long they're left alone and they make big messes and stuff like that. My kids never went through anything like that. Like, my different boyfriend type people, they tried their best to get me to ignore my very first kid, to just like ignore him and leave him in a crib to cry and stuff. They did everything they could trying to get even more than one boyfriend. And I guess that was like, that's been part of like tradition, just to put the baby in the crib and just let them cry it out. It's just an absolutely terrible tradition type thing that people were just allowing to happen. And I had to finally be like, no, I can't do this. I can't just put my baby in the crib and just let him cry. Like, this is terrible. Like, I feel really regretful and sad for the times that all these people were like, I just put the baby in the crib and stuff. Like, it ended up being absolutely terrible. Like, don't listen to them if they tell you that. If they're like, oh, your baby will be fine, to just let them cry for a little bit. Yeah, that might be okay once in a while, but not, you don't just put your baby in the crib and just let them cry themselves to sleep and stuff. That's like a really terrible practice. Also, if your kids tell you that they didn't make that mess, they really may not have, So by the time that it came to like my littlest kid, people setting it up to make it look like he was getting paint all over the place. We already knew that it wasn't him because of how many times my older kids had, when they were younger, been set up by my family to make it look like they were making all these messes. And it would be the equivalent of like, for them, it would have been like me leaving in the morning or something and being like, hey, I'm out. I'll be back here after a while. And then being like, okay, while they're watching like movies or something on TV. And then like later on, I come back and they turn around and there's trash and there's just stuff everywhere and cups and plates, and they're like, what? And I'm like, wow, you guys really messed this place up in one day. And they turn around, they're like, what? I'm like, what are you talking about? Because all they've done all day is sit there in front of the TV. They haven't wandered away from that spot. Yeah, and back then, like, we were at my grandma's house, you know what I mean? So whatever they did was like a reflection on me. And so here I am, like, trying to be all embarrassed and stuff like that over my kids being rowdy and mess making, when they, in fact, weren't being rowdy and mess making at all. My family was just setting it up to make them look like they were these terrible kids. And also they would set things up to look like it was majorly trashed all the time. And then at a couple points they would get it real trash, and then they would say, well, Chris, um, I gave Chris $20 and she went in there and she cleaned it all up. So they would trash, our room basically, and then they would go through it and just take whatever they wanted. So like, she paid Chris to go in there and clean the room, and then Chris also steals my laptop and a couple other of my things and the money that I have sitting there and all of my fireworks and things like that. $200 worth of fireworks. But yeah, that's where one of the devices went that would have had my, some kind of accounts on it, and probably pictures of my kids and I. So, there's one of them. There's where one of them went. There was also a phone that was replaced uh, not during that time frame, but years before, whenever I worked at the whatchamacallit, the uh, golf course in Amarillo. Whenever I worked at the golf course club thing, um, I would start to use a smartphone instead of a flip phone. And I remember my grandma, I remember her being like, "Hey, I'm going to keep this flip phone that I had in your name and had your number on it. I'm just going to go ahead and keep it on, okay, Donna?" And I knew she was going to do shady, messed up stuff with that phone. Like, because back then they were setting me up too a lot, but they were setting me up in these other really weird, nasty, different ways. It was really, actually, really hurtful. Because so much of it was just purely sexually driven and sexually related, it was actually really upsetting to me that my family was so like overly involved with me in that way. That was a one time frame that they really let it be known. It was really loud. There was a time that I lived in Valley Green, and as I was leaving Valley Green, I cleaned my whole apartment. I cleaned it up really well, and because I wanted to be able to come back later on if I needed to. And I'd had several different apartments in Valley Green, and I'd not ever trashed any of them. And that apartment in particular, I left the keys on the counter, and I let maintenance know that I had left and that I left the keys on the counter. And apparently, Ashley and a few other people that lived over beside me in the back of the 9 building went in and trashed that fucking apartment. And I don't know how long they trashed it and how long they used it before maintenance actually um, did something about it. But I'm pretty sure that maintenance was involved in that too. You know what I mean? Because all those bad guys were all, you know what I mean? The maintenance was involved in the bad guys back then too. And then there was a time, the first time that CPS illegally took my kids, which I have not made a video about and need to very soon. That bitch, her last name is Straight. And she lied and said that she went into my apartment. Um, and she said that she went into my apartment while I was in jail and that she went through and got stuff for my kids, got clothes for my kids and all this stuff, but she totally did not go to my apartment while I was in jail. My brother was in my apartment the whole time I was in jail, and she never showed up there. And she even wrote it up in her report that she came into my apartment and what terrible conditions my apartment was in and all this. She didn't even go into my apartment. Oh, yeah, but like the mess making. So they have all these different ways to make all these messes in all these different ways. And they like to they like to shred things and tear things apart. One of the big things that they would do in my case was use oil because I was a Christian, or because I'm a Christian, and because it's all of this is part of this whole like Christian persecution thing. They will take oil and they would basically get oil, and they would use the oil for, nasty purposes, and they would get it on everything and make sure that they got it on everything. So it'd be like you're in an apartment where people don't let you know that they're using it as like a fuck pad basically, and they come into your apartment while you're like in the shower or at work or you're asleep or you're just gone, whatever, and they show up there and they use that oil and they have, different kind of relations in it, and they leave it all over your stuff. They leave it all over your countertops. They leave it all in your car. They leave it all over the floor. They leave it on your, they leave it on your table. They leave it on in your carpet. They leave it on your blankets. They leave it on your bed. They leave it on your kid's bed. They leave it on your front deck. They leave it on your back porch. They leave it. And slowly but surely, everything in your house becomes trash because not everything can survive certain oils. Like, you can't technically get oil on anything, on just anything. And you can't just like clean it off of just anything. And certain kinds of oils you can't really get out of. Like, you can get it out of there a little bit or off of it anyways. Like, things actually do your property actually does begin to get destroyed by this stuff. And also just the fact of what they're doing on your stuff also just kind of like destroys it mentally for you or spiritually or something like that. But they would basically go through and get this oil stuff all over everything. And then the paint, I would see the paint on things, and they would use that all across the United States. Like, if they felt like I was hanging out somewhere too long, they would start putting paint on stuff, or start putting oil on stuff, or just trying to, make themselves known, put kitty litter on everything, put the cat piss on my stuff. Cats was something that I was tortured with whenever I was little, and that's something that they've had to carry on. Just like, just like the picture taking was something that they kind of tortured me with whenever I was little, and something that they chose to use to carry on. And nasty little things that they know were abuse tactics whenever I was little. They've all, gone along with my parents' suggestions and things like that, to continue to use those different abuse tactics against me, which is really sick stuff. Um, uh, One thing that JW did was bring in a huge, like two huge boxes of paraphernalia, and open up my dresser and clear everything out of the top drawer and just pour all of his paraphernalia that he brought in into the top drawer. So like a whole drawer full of just pipes. And then he'd open the second drawer and pour all this paraphernalia into the second drawer. And so now it looks like, you know what I mean? Now it looks like that I have somehow collected two drawers full of, you know what I mean, just now packed to the brim. Another way that they will try to make things dirty is by just simply pissing all over the toilet seat and getting piss all over the floor, around the toilet, and on the ground on the toilet, and all over the toilet seat and down the toilet seat and stuff. They just all act like they're just too, you know what I mean, to notice or to fix it or whatever. That's very common. And it's not an accident when they do that shit. That shit is fucking completely deliberate. All of the, making clothes super disgusting, and then just throwing them, tossing them to the side, and tossing your black nasty socks off to the wayside for some chick to pick up. Right, so I've talked about the oil, cutting things up into tiny little pieces, just getting stuff everywhere, rubbing things into the floor, getting oils into the carpet or onto the walls and things like that. It's basically like having someone come into a situation that is uh, like sort of okay, and them making it just as disgusting and messed up as possible. And a lot of the times, my parents or my exes or whatever, they would be doing all this stuff, and they would be setting things up to be really bad so that they could come in and take these pictures, right? And so they were always taking these pictures and having all these pictures taken and stuff. And they would wait until there was even a house out in the country that had, they waited until we abandoned and everything. It was really bad off. We had abandoned it. Even it had been abandoned to the point that the cats had even come in and used the bathroom, I guess, in the tub, which is a state of affairs that I would have never lived in, nor would I have allowed my children to live in that state of affairs. But the trailer was really that bad off. I mean, there was a hole in the floor, there was a hole in the ceiling. The cats were getting in and out. They were lucky, I guess, to have the trailer to hide in. I guess my parents actually went through and took pictures of even after the place had been abandoned for months, and there was cat poop in the tub and stuff. They took pictures of that with the hole in the floor and stuff, and they tried to say that that was the way that my kids and I were living while we were there, and totally was not. And I was like, who are they showing these pictures to anyways? Like I told you, JW was taking pictures after he trashed the kids' room, and these people actually expect you to run in their kids' rooms, see the messes that they think that their kids made, and just beat the living hell out of their kids. And I already knew that these people were doing this shit deliberately, and so I was not freaking out on my kids like that. And it would have been really mean if I had, because my kids are fucking really cool. So your kids are probably really fucking cool too, just saying. And then they would I don't know, it's they would do stuff, and then they would record things, and I was like, what, why are they recording this? I was like, who are they why are they trashing my kids' room and then filming it like that? And you know what I mean? Like, I just cleaned that room and then they trashed it and then they filmed it, and then they would either hurry up and clean it back up, or they would just leave it like that. And in that one case, they just left it like that. And I was just like walking in my room and I was like, what happened to your room? You know what I mean? Like, and my kid was like, you know what I mean? He was like, I don't know. It was like a mystery to him. We both had the same like looks on our faces, and just to know that people set these kids up, like, you know what I mean, and moms up to look like they, you know what I mean, just completely trash shit, and they're just that retarded and fucked up. But yeah, they were taking the videos and the pictures that they were taking of what they were claiming was, me and me being crazy and my messes and stuff. And they were apparently taking them to a fucking judge behind my back. And they were telling this judge that I was like so crazy that I couldn't even get out of bed, um, to come to you know what I mean, to come to court or anything. That I was just so out there. I couldn't even clean my house, and that my kids were suffering like that. Um, and like, I guess that's how they were getting annuity checks, or and social security checks behind my back or something like that. But I guess it also has to do with like some kind of like witchcraft stuff, which is basically like, if all you're really allowed to do as a slave mom is, clean and keep your place clean, and that's how you show love to your family, and honor and respect your family and yourself, and that you respect cleanliness and godliness. There's people who don't, and there's people who don't appreciate the fact that you do, and they don't want kids being brought up in good, loving, environments. And they'll do, I guess, whatever it takes to just completely orchestrate this weird mess making, not only in physical tiny ways with material things in front of you, but they'll do that. They'll implement the same idea across the whole scope of your entire life. Um, that has been known to happen as well. And yeah, I'm going to jump off of here and start to upload this. And I have to say that I really am shocked at the difference in the upload time between just me using my regular unlimited, data, and me going over here and jumping on Wi-Fi. Like, I'm surprised at how much faster that it uploads on Wi-Fi, which is honestly crappy. I mean, if I'm paying $50 a month for unlimited service and I'm in town, I don't understand why it would take that long for a video that's only 30 minutes to upload. Like, I don't understand why that would take 4 or 5 hours. It's kind of crappy. And I wasn't entirely planning on making the video about the mess making. If I thought about it a little bit longer, I could probably come up with like more to say about it. But that's the gist of it, and those are a little bit of like the important parts of how it um, was, used against me. Oh, I didn't add this though, that sometimes, like, before I get to a place, when people are like setting me up to go to a place or whatever, they'll make sure to get it really nasty and messy, because they know that I'm a really like clean person and that I like to clean things. Um and it's not that I like to clean things necessarily. It's just that I like to I bask in a clean environment. I like that. I like things to be like sanitized and clean. But my enemy doesn't, and my enemy doesn't care about anything like that. They like for things to be really nasty. They like to swim in their own, and they like to cover each other, and they definitely don't care about how I want anything to be or whatever. So because am a clean freak or whatever, a little bit, um, they their attacks of weird, dirty things or whatever is one of the ways that they'll mess things up deliberately. And Anyways, that isn't anything new. That's something that's been going on for a really long time. And it really is kind of shitty to like have somebody who's only allowed to be a mom and who's only allowed to just be this like slave person who takes care of children. And they're only allowed to, clean and cook and things like that. But then you go in and like, fuck up their food or, fuck up their places. And you know what I mean? It's like just how quickly you can throw somebody completely off of their whatever. Um, but yeah, and I will say this too, that with my cars, they would always do stuff to make the outside of my car especially look way shittier than it needed to be. Like having to make sure that there was duct tape on something or um, uh, making sure that the door didn't match everything else, or just anything that they could do to make or mess up the grill, or make it to where the parts and pieces were broken and it all just fit together and broken pieces and shit like that. Like they just did like different dumb shit to make my cars look fucked up, to kind of like attract attention to me and shit. And if they weren't doing something to make my car look messed up, then something would all of a sudden mess up in my car, you know. And I do think that they even kind of did this deliberately to taunt me a little bit in jail, or to mess with me whenever I was in jail, because like I would go to sleep and there wouldn't be anything in the room with me, and then I would wake up and there would be like rubber gloves inside out strewn about the room and like other trash in there and stuff, and I'd just be suddenly surrounded by trash. They would also like do shit like come into the restaurants where I worked and make these like have people make these crazy hella disgusting messes, for me to clean up or whatever. And it happened so much whenever I worked at China Walk. Like, and they would use the excuse that it was just the people that came in for the college, that the college students were really just disgusting like that, like little toddlers. And they might be in a way, but this was a habit that they carried on anywhere that they knew that I would be bussing tables. They would also make things nasty at my workplace.